left Germany behind, built a life his way. Rachel, Nevada, dust and light, jets in the sky, no aliens inside. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will and a heart of gold. Dreamland Resort for 30 years strong, Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts, his legacy. Signals run wild, YouTube in his heart, camera live. The FBI came but they can't break him down. His fire keeps burning, it won't drown. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will. His legacy.
Well, howdy folks, here we are again. Thanks for tuning in tonight. And special thanks to my channel members who support my channel. For less than the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can become a member and always get the latest and greatest news of Area 51 behind the scenes and some early access to some of the videos. Thanks for all your support and thanks for tuning in. We welcome again today Peter Merlin. Of course, everybody knows who Peter is, aviation historian. He literally wrote the book on Area 51. Link to the book is in the description. And you can order it on Amazon. Great book, the book on Area 51. If you read one book about Area 51, that's the one that you want to read. And of course, also special thanks to Linda, aka Dragon Rose, moderating and keeping things civil here in the chat. We plan on about an hour today. I'm going to try and keep the streams a little shorter so they are easier to digest. What we don't cover today, we'll cover next time. Today, we're going to be talking about the A-12 program at Area 51. And with that, if I can find the right button, welcome, Peter Merlin.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, thank you for being on the stream. Awesome. This is really, this is going to be an exciting stream talking about the A-12. So,
well, it's certainly one of my favorite aircraft. I've been fascinated in it ever since I found out that there was something that came before the SR-71 Blackbird.
Yeah, a lot of people, and hopefully we have time to get into that later on. A lot of people don't realize that those are two different aircraft, the A-12 and the SR-71, even though they look very similar, but they are totally different aircraft. I plan on covering that at the end of this stream, or whatever we don't cover today, there's always a next stream. We'll cover it. We don't want to rush things. I mean, we really want to take the time and try to give people that are new to the subject an intro, and also give people that have already studied the subject a little more in-depth insight here. Let's start with let's just set the stage. Why did we need the A-12 back in the 1950s, 60s?
Well, what happened was that the CIA started out with the U-2 as a airborne reconnaissance platform to look behind the Iron Curtain and take pictures of things in denied territories like the Soviet Union and its satellite states. But officials knew pretty much from the beginning that this was really just a stopgap measure. The U-2 was subsonic. It flew very slowly. It was easily tracked on radar. And eventually, despite its high altitude capabilities, above 70,000 feet, it would soon become vulnerable to surface-to-air missiles. So by the mid to late 1950s, just as the U-2 was becoming operational, the agency and companies like Lockheed and others were beginning to look into a successor, a new aircraft that could fly higher and faster and would be harder to detect by radar.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it did, and fast and high it did fly. It flew what about Mach 3?
Yeah, so in the early part of the design phases, you had Convair and Lockheed competing for the contract. And both of them were shooting for a platform that could fly at speeds above 2,100 miles per hour, so more than Mach 3, possibly even Mach 4. They were really looking at a high-speed aircraft and something that could fly high, maybe as high as 100,000 feet. Well, this was a really ambitious goal for a time when we just didn't have the aircraft that had those performance capabilities. And there's a very long story, which I tell much of in my book, about how these two companies came up with different designs. But long story short, Lockheed ended up winning the contract. Kelly Johnson, as the chief designer for Lockheed Skunk Works, had begun a series of designs, which started with the Archangel 1 or A1. And he worked through a number of different design iterations, trying to come up with something that would be relatively easy to produce and would be a good operational platform. And the trouble was, he could make a plane that could fly really high and really fast, but it was really hard to reduce the radar cross section. So for a while, he got away from that and experimented with some other designs, which he based on a flying saucer shape, because he knew that would be something that had low radar cross section. And he had a concept of a metallic saucer, but with long, thin plastic wings, and the wings would be invisible to radar, so that wouldn't be an issue. But it was a subsonic platform, and the CIA, as the customer, said, no, we really want something that flies super fast. So he went back to the drawing board and pounded away some more designs, and he finally gave up on the idea of low observability, but this is before the term stealth ever came up. And he just made something that would fly at Mach 3 speeds at altitudes up to around 100,000 feet. And he said, look, it's going to be tracked on radar, and probably anything I could design will be trackable on radar. The agency said, nope, go back to the drawing board. So he did. And he really thought at that point that he'd lost the contract. But the CIA said, look, if you can come up with a design that's harder to track, show us some proof of radar tests, we'll give you the contract. And he came up with the A-12. And it was a revolutionary design. It had a long four-body fuselage that was flattened out on the edges into what we call chines, and a couple turbojet engines with special nacelles that could essentially convert to virtually a ramjet, which I'll explain a little bit more about shortly. But the main thing was that he'd reduced the radar cross-section significantly. And in order to prove that, there were some subscale and full-scale models that were tested. The original RCS test range was at Indian Springs. But in 1959, Johnson said, look, this RCS range is not secure. It's too close to Highway 95. People will see these strange models. Can we please move the range up to Groom Lake? And so in 1959, they began moving the EG&G Special Projects radar range to what used to be Watertown Airstrip. Reynolds Electrical and Engineering Company, RECO, was the prime contractor on this job. And one of their accountants assigned a project number to the task. He called it Project 51, like all of the projects on the Nevada test site. And it had a project number. And so that became the area number, Area 51. That's what stuck. And that's how it got its famous number. But the radar range was built up at Area 51. They did testing of the models and reducing that radar cross section even further through modifications. And eventually, the agency needed a test site and basing site for the A-12 spy plane. And they looked at Area 51. They said, well, no, the runway here is only 5,000 feet long. It's made of asphalt. It's too short, and it won't support the weight of the aircraft. And if we wanted to have a base that will support it, we'd have to build a completely new base here. So how about looking at some Air Force bases that were programmed for closure? And there were several. They were good ideas, but they were not secure because they're close to cities and towns, and you don't have that remote location. Also, it would have cost a lot to operate them on an annual basis. At one point, the CIA considered basing the A-12s at Edwards in California. But again, you would have had too many uncleared personnel seeing the aircraft. So they said, yeah, let's just spend the money. We'll build the big base at Area 51. And that is really how the Groom Lake base became a permanent facility. And they built an 8,500-foot long runway with a 6,000-foot extension out onto the lake bed in case of emergencies or contingencies. There were some crosswind runways marked on the lake bed, and they needed to put in hangars and all kinds of housing and other infrastructure. But they got it done in the early 1960s. And by the spring of 1962, it was time to do the first test flights. Lewis W. Schock, a Lockheed test pilot, was assigned to be the prime contractor test pilot in the beginning. And he did the early flights and got the plane up above Mach 1. And pretty soon, it was time to bring in some other Lockheed test pilots and CIA pilots and get them trained up to get them ready for operational flying. And Area 51 became the domestic basing location for the operational unit as well as the testing.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the runway and the extension of the runway. There's, I think, still a myth floating around about this 13,000 foot runway at Area 51. It really is a runway of 8,000 and change, and then the rest is overshoot for emergencies. Right. It was never meant to be a usable and regularly used runway, correct?
That's absolutely correct. In fact, the extension out onto the lake bed had no lighting, so it could not be used for nighttime operations, and it was really only considered as a contingency strip. And when people look at the overhead images and you see that long runway, you've got the initial 8,500-foot runway, the big extension, and then there was a lot of cleared space beyond that in case they ever needed to extend it even more. Then in the 80s, the south end got extended 5,000 feet because the north end was cracking and falling apart. And so it looks on the satellite photos like this huge runway. But it really, when you look at the operational portion of it, is pretty standard.
Yeah. And I think eventually they just abandoned that whole runway altogether in the 90s, I believe, and built a new runway on slightly higher ground that wasn't as prone to flooding.
Right. Absolutely.
So, well, that would be for a different project in the future. We'll talk about that another time. But didn't they also at that point start developing the South Ramp area?
Right. So you have the main base complex, and there are 4 big hangars up on the north end, on the north ramp. And the test aircraft were housed up there. And they built down the south ramp a row of hangars for the operational CIA aircraft that were assigned to the 1129th Special Activities Squadron, the Roadrunners.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we all know the Roadrunners. And if anyone's interested in the history, in the early history, roadrunnersinternational.com linked. I think it's also linked from the description of this video. There's all kinds of information about that. So that was really the birth of the Roadrunners at Area 51.
Right.
And I
Absolutely.
think one of them, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, um, when I first heard about their organization, I thought, well, they must have some really amazing stories. And I'm very happy to say that in the late 1990s, I got to meet the actual Roadrunners and join their organization as an associate member and get to know them and hear their stories. And it's just fantastic. The things that they were able to do out there uh, in a world of secrecy, which it had to be, and it was very difficult on their families, of course, because these guys would go and work away from home for weeks or months at a time, come back home, and they couldn't tell their families what they were doing. So it wasn't until the end of the OXCART program that some of the family members were at least allowed to actually see, I think, the final flight of the aircraft when they were putting them into storage at Palmdale in California. And I think some of the wives were present at the ceremony at Area 51 where the CIA presented medals to the pilots who'd flown the planes.
Yeah, I mean that's really I can't even imagine going to work on Monday morning, coming home on Thursday night or Friday morning, whatever the case may be, and well, honey, I can't tell you where I went. Uh, that takes a lot of trust. And actually, just to make our audience aware, next week I'm going to be talking to TD Barnes, who has actually worked at Area 51 in those days. So he's going to be talking a little bit about the day-to-day life and the way the CIA and the Air Force interfaced or out there, and the strain that it put on their families. He'll be talking about that aspect of the program. I mean, I can't even imagine. Not, I think the wives had a phone number that they could call, and that was pretty much it for emergencies.
Right. And,
Uh,
so they had no idea that their husbands were out there working with really cutting edge aviation technology. This new airplane, the A-12, uh, all of the design work that went into it. This is an airframe that was made mostly of titanium and other exotic alloys because it was subject to extreme temperatures uh, while traveling at supersonic speeds, and because of the need to make it less vulnerable to radar, those chines and the tail fins and the engine inlet cones and certain parts of the aircraft had to be made from composite materials. They refer to them as plastics, although it had a lot of asbestos and phenylsilane and things like uh, that were radar absorbent structures. And these also had to be compatible with the titanium uh, and had to be subject to the same high temperatures in some parts of the aircraft, higher than 800 degrees Fahrenheit. And the engines, the way they worked, you had some standard turbojet engines, but they were locked into these housings, these nacelles, with a big cone on the front of each one. And the pilot could control the location of that shock cone to keep the shock wave inside the inlet to have airflow through there. But another thing that happened was at about Mach 2.5, the pilot would uh, change the airflow. So instead of going through the engine, it was going around the engine through the nacelle, effectively turning the nacelle into a ramjet, which is why some people describe the setup as a turbo ramjet. And it allowed the airplane to cruise at Mach 3.2, which was the optimum design cruise speed for all of the Blackbird models, 3.2. If the air temperatures outside were cool enough, you could squeeze a little bit more thrust out of it, but it was limited by the compressor inlet temperature.
yeah, and you already mentioned those cones that they had in the engines. Uh, that was to prevent or to mitigate a phenomenon that they called unstarts, where
Right.
the airstream would be disrupted inside the engine. And apparently, there was a very violent happening when that happened, and really bounced the pilot around the canopy.
It was indeed a very violent thing to have if you had one of the uh, shock waves slip out of the inlet on one side. Then you've got an asymmetrical unstart. And so the pilots who had to live through that said it was like being in a train wreck. And really, it could be so violent that it could potentially cause the aircraft to crash. But in most cases, it was just something they had to fight with until you could get it back under control. Eventually, Lockheed developed a system that mitigated that, so the pilot had less of a workload to keep that from happening. Thank goodness, because it was really a lot of effort on the pilot's part with the early flights.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, that's you're flying up there and you're trying to focus on getting a mission done, and all of a sudden, from what I'm hearing, out of nowhere, all of a sudden you get thrown around in the cockpit without really any warning. I guess there was no early indication of it happening. It just all of a sudden happened.
Yeah,
And
that's pretty much it. We've been mentioning things like the SR-71 versus the A-12, and the one thing I should probably mention is that the Blackbird family of aircraft, really, you've got several different ones, and Kelly Johnson had the idea of creating essentially a common airframe, which could have certain features added on if the customer needed a particular mission set. So you got your basic A-12 that the CIA needed as a reconnaissance platform, and that was capable of going up to 90,000 feet, Mach 3.2 cruise. It was designed essentially as a single sensor platform. You had a bay behind the cockpit to mount a huge camera system or other sensor, and then that was Project OXCART. Then he developed for the Air Force an interceptor version. So it's basically the same airframe, except instead of having a camera, it had big radar in the nose cone and could carry missiles. There were missile bays to launch air-to-air missiles against targets. It was an interceptor. And some changes were made which caused it to be, it was not as stable in certain ways, so they had to add some extra fins to the underside, some ventral fins, strakes along the bottom of the nacelles, and a big ventral fin on the bottom. So it really looks kind of different from the A-12. Plus, you put a second cockpit in behind the first one, so you have someone to launch the missiles. And the Air Force was planning to buy some A-12s for themselves, but ultimately, most of those, there were, I think, 5 on order. 3 of them went back to the CIA, and 2 of them were programmed to be modified into something called the M21, which is a mothership for a drone. And so that was Project Tagboard. And the drone was a ramjet-powered vehicle. It was one-time use only. You'd mount it on the back of this M21 mothership, which looked like your basic A-12, except it had a second cockpit for a launch control officer, like that YF-12. And there was a pylon on the back to carry the drone. They could carry it up, get it up to Mach 3 speeds to light up the ramjet, and the pilot would have to make a slight diving maneuver so he could launch the drone off the top. And it was supposed to fly off and do its mission, and then eject a camera pod at a recovery point, and the drone would self-destruct, and the camera would get recovered in midair by the crew of C-130. So some of the early launch tests worked fairly well. There are videos of this online. I've seen them, and it's pretty eerie to see the drone lift up off the back of the Blackbird type aircraft and then just sort of sit there before it leaves. In one instance, I think it was the 4th test, the drone may have had an unstart. It tipped over and crashed into the mothership. So both vehicles were lost. One of the crewmen in the mothership drowned because they both had to parachute into the sea, and that was very unfortunate. It heralded an operational change to the program, which was already in the works. I think Kelly Johnson really knew it was a pretty dangerous method of launching something. So he had already been looking at the idea of launching the D-21 off the wing of a B-52. But in order to boost the D-21 to Mach 3 speeds, because obviously a B-52 is subsonic, he added a solid fuel rocket underneath the drone. So this drone would be stacked with the rocket booster and hung under the wing of the B-52 and then dropped at a certain point. The rocket engine would fire 5 seconds later, boost the drone to Mach 3 speeds, get its ramjet going, the booster would burn out and fall away, and the drone would go and fly its mission just as normal. And there were several very successful test flights, and there were a few operational flights that unfortunately never produced anything particularly useful, because they kept losing the drone or the camera package. One of the drones ended up in China. It's currently in a museum there. Another one ended up in Russia, and the Russians reverse engineered it and tried to build their own. I don't know if they ever flew it, but they did try.
I mean, it just seems counterintuitive from the get-go to launch something above you rather than something hanging off of you that can just fall away by gravity and do its thing. So
Right.
I can't even, I mean, I get it. You couldn't strap it under the A-12 because there's just not enough room, not enough clearance. But it just seems like a very dangerous maneuver. And I, like you said, I think they kind of had an idea of this may not be a good idea right from the get-go.
It was known to be very risky, and in fact, some years later, I guess maybe shortly after the tag board program had been canceled altogether in the early 70s, NASA was looking at the idea of using an SR-71 as a mothership for an experimental vehicle. And they were going to put it on the back of the SR-71 and launch it very much like the D-21. And Lockheed put together a report looking at the possibility of doing that. And Kelly Johnson wrote a note on that report before he said, someone needs to talk to me first before you try this, because a lot of folks, certainly the ones at NASA, had no idea that there had been this secret program going on at Area 51, and they didn't know what had happened and the consequences of what they might be facing.
So this accident was somehow swept under the rug, or it was somehow not fully acknowledged. Was there any
It,
cover story for it?
right. Well, see, the accident took place over the Pacific Ocean, and so it was, a couple hundred miles off the coast of California. The fact that one of the crew members died did get some media attention, but the reason for it was kept quiet for quite a few years. It wasn't until I think the early 1980s that both the A-12 and the D-21 were finally publicly revealed. They had been declassified to the point that they could have been revealed as early as 1976, but they were not announced. The Air Force had the remaining aircraft, and they put together a statement that would be in response to any queries, but they weren't going to make that statement until someone actually asked the question. And I think I should also mention, since we're talking about it, I keep mentioning the SR-71. That was the Air Force reconnaissance platform, which was a multi-sensor version of the A-12 type aircraft. It had a lot more places to put different kinds of cameras and sensors in the chine bays, the fuselage, and the nose. And it had a second seat for a sensor operator. The Strategic Air Command was very keen to get that mission of strategic reconnaissance. And in fact, other people within government were actively working to cancel the A-12 before the OXCART aircraft had ever done any operational missions. They were saying, well, why do we need the A-12? We've got the new SR-71 coming in with all this sensor capability. Why don't we just wait for that? So it almost happened that the OXCART never got to fulfill its function. That would have been very sad. Fortunately, that worked out. But the SR-71 came about as originally known as the R-12. And it was designed for the Air Force, specifically as the customer. and became redesignated the SR-71 in 1964. And so that's how it became known. And because that one was always acknowledged from pretty much the beginning, whereas the A-12 and the M21, D-21, some of those things were hidden away for decades, the SR-71 became the most famous variant of all the Blackbirds.
Wasn't there something with the designation that it was supposed to be originally designated RS-71 and somebody transposed
It's
the
there
letters?
there right, and there is a myth, an absolute myth, that the reason it got the designation was, and yes, it was going to be the RS-71 because at one point the B-70 Valkyrie, built by North American Aviation, there were plans to make that an operational Mach 3 bomber, and it would have belonged to Strategic Air Command. And they had decided at some point to designate it the RS-70 for reconnaissance strike. And it got canceled. Got canceled pretty early on, even before I think before the XB-70 prototypes even flew. But because of that numbering system, the R-12 was going to be the RS-71. And President Lyndon Johnson gave a speech in which he announced the existence of this project to build the RS-71. And it got except that he called it the SR-71 because the head of SAC didn't like the RS version. He thought it should be SR for strategic reconnaissance, I guess. And so President Johnson did say correctly SR-71, but his secretary transposed the numbers in the transcripts, and later on, authors doing research on the Blackbirds came across the transcripts and they thought, oh, the president screwed up. And no, that's not the way it happened. One of the former commanders of the 9th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing, the Blackbirds at Beale Air Force Base, researched this at the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library. And so he was able to do primary source material research, listening to the recordings, looking at the transcripts, and he figured out where the myth came from. But it's almost impossible to kill a myth because it gets repeated over and over again in books or on the internet.
Yeah, well, interesting. It's probably in your book, and I'm sure I've read it, but I that slipped my mind that it was actually the president was right, but
right, and you're easily forgiven because I do explain all that, but it's buried in one of the source notes all the way at the back. It's one of the several Easter eggs hidden in the source notes.
interesting.
I've got 47 pages of source notes at the back of this thing. So there's a lot of interesting stuff squirreled away in there that I couldn't fit into the main text.
I have to admit that is the one part of your book that I haven't read. I will have to definitely do that.
And I know there's been a lot of talk about the difference between the A-12 and the SR-71 as far as capabilities. Sometimes you'll see online references claiming that the A-12 was inherently faster than the SR-71. It's not true. Again, the speed was dependent on compressor inlet temperature, not wanting to go over the red line limit. They effectively both had Mach 3.2 as the optimum cruise speed. You could get a little more speed out of it if you had cooler air temperatures. As far as altitude went, the SR-71 weighed about an extra 20,000 pounds. So it was a much heavier aircraft and therefore couldn't get up to as high an altitude as the A-12. The A-12 could get to 90,000 feet, no problem. Typical mission altitudes range from about 70,000 to 85,000 feet on average. The SR-71 in the flight manual says the maximum altitude for the SR-71 is 85,000 feet. They did get higher than that in test flights. I think one of them went to 86,000 I don't remember the exact numbers right now. I've got it somewhere. And one of the test pilots claimed that he got it up to 89,000 by basically flying with a very low fuel load and flying an optimum flight profile, not carrying any kind of sensor payload. So it was a lightweight aircraft, and he says he got it up that high. I've never found the test report that would prove that, sadly, but um, he's I he's probably right, and I'm sure would have been capable of doing that.
Well, I'm seeing we're already getting the first questions here in the chat, and it's over half an hour. It might be
Okay,
time to.
sure.
There's still a lot of subjects around the A-12 that we haven't touched on. I wanted to talk about the Walter Ray accident and other things. Let's just continue this in the next stream and take some
Sure.
questions. I know people are eager to get their questions answered. The first question that I'm seeing from Skywatcher is, what about the TA-12 titanium goose?
Right. So there was only one trainer model for the A-12 series, and it's for OXCART, had Lockheed designation A-12T, but it was given the Air Force designation TA-12. And so you'll have documents from Lockheed that call it the A-12T, and then there's the Air Force flight manual and pilots' flight records calling it the TA-12. It never had the J-58 engines. It only had the J-75s. So it only flew at Mach 2, 2.5 speeds, never got up to Mach 3. And I'm happy to say that that aircraft has been preserved. It's at the museum in Los Angeles, and it's one of the nicest displays. If they keep it clean, has a tendency to get a little dusty down there.
Yeah, I hope everybody got that. It looks like the network issue was on our side. Maybe the FBI is stepping on the line here. It looks like we're back online. I hope you guys didn't miss too much. I can see that we're back online now. Sorry about that. I think it may just be the FBI messing with me here. Okay, we got the next question from Aircraft Expeditions. Question for Peter: was it correct that when the A-12 was being tested and they took it off the RCS pylon, it made a heated shadow that gave the other side the overall shape of the A-12?
Oh, actually, I think that's from when the aircraft was on the parking ramp, and it cast its own shadow onto the concrete. If a Russian satellite was overhead using infrared, they might well have gotten an image of the shadow in showing what the aircraft looked like. Interesting thing to mention in terms of shape like that. When the number 3 A-12 crashed near Wendover on the Nevada-Utah state line, it struck the ground inverted and left its shape in the ground, and you can actually see that in some of the aerial photos from that time.
Oh wow, that is. I wonder if it still shows up on Google Earth in newer photos. Probably not. It's probably washed out by now.
Well, yeah, you'd think so. I actually found it let me see, I found it in a picture that had been taken some years afterwards, and when I went there, you could still see where the tail fins had gouged in
Wow.
and where the aft fuselage is struck. It's worn a bit from the weathering naturally.
Amazing. I mean, that's always amazes me, and people that haven't been out here at crash sites, things just are preserved very well at crash sites, and if it doesn't weather away, it just stays there. And even car vehicle tracks stay here for dozens of years, sometimes for 50, 100 years. You can
They're
still see in Death Valley, I guess you can still see wagon tracks of
right.
the settlers back in the 18 somethings. It's amazing. Steve Jufy asks, did anything noteworthy about Area 51 become unclassified since Peter wrote his excellent book? In other words, is there anything new in there that you couldn't talk about when you wrote your book?
Um, Oh, anything that I've learned since the book was published, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Um,
In other words, is there going to be another
yes.
book with an update?
Well, yeah, not really sure how to approach that because um, there's my book has so many pages and so many photos that I can't really like make a second edition where I add more chapters, which is a little bit too bad. But maybe
Yeah.
maybe I'll have to write some supplementary things. I ultimately will not try to write a book about the next the next 50 years of Area 51 because someone younger will probably have to take on that role. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that yeah.
like anything, there's always, we look at some of these new programs coming along and some of the talk about things like the next generation air dominance and all these new UAVs, and there's always new information that's going to be coming out. Um, it's a living history. It's not something, that's what's really hard about writing this story is because, at some point you just have to say, okay, this is as far as I can take it, and the it's a continuing uh, history of a place that's going on and on, still working, still producing fantastic things with amazing people. So I think in the future there will hopefully be more stories coming out of there.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do when you're running a website. I can just go and edit a page and just put new information on it. It's not so easy with a book.
Right.
Uh, Next question is from Jeff York. Jeff York, can anyone answer if there is a special significance for Area 51 having the designation Homey Airport?
Yeah, my theory about that is that it comes from uh, the phrase home plate. When they talked about the base, there are some references to it as home plate that was used during Project OXCART as a radio call. The pilot would say that he was, on his next leg, he would be heading to home plate. You can kind of see where they would get that because the shape of the lake bed is almost like the five-sided shape of home plate in baseball. And so that may have been where that originated. But I think that's where Homey Airport comes from. It's just references to home plate. It seems like a very unofficial kind of term. There's a lot of argument over how it ended up being put into a particular database some years ago where Groom Lake was referred to as Homey Airport.
Yeah, I've actually heard in radio traffic not long ago, home plate or home base. So it is still being used. And yeah, I agree with you. I think that's where the Homey Airport comes from. Whether it's an official designation or it was just made official by being used in that database, some things just take on a life on their own and become official just by virtue of being there. So.
Sure.
Okay, I think I know the answer to that, but I'll let you answer this from Quid76. Peter, did the pilots really warm food on the windscreens of the A-12 and the SR-71 in flight?
Yes, absolutely true. Because parts of the exterior of the aircraft during Mach 3 flight would really heat up to hundreds and hundreds of degrees, and this heat would transfer in to the inner surface of the window. The pilot could hold his food tube up against that and warm it up. So yeah, that's true.
That is amazing. I would have said absolutely not, but I just learned something. That's amazing.
Well,
I
one
know
of
that
the
the. Go
sorry,
ahead.
one of the things that I put, each of my chapters in the book has a little vignette at the beginning, and one of them I describe a test flight which was in the second A-12, and the pilot took off out of Area 51 and did a high speed run. And I mean, coming back down, the heating was actually melting some of the rubber seals off of the interior of the canopy. And so, you've got he's in a full pressure suit with an air conditioner built in. So, that's keeping him alive. The pressure above 70,000 feet, without that pressure suit, he wouldn't live. And the temperatures, extreme cold to extreme heat and back again. And, the heat was causing these rubber seals to peel away. And then the plane's shaking like crazy. And he's rattling around in there. And it just sounded brutal. And now he's descending towards Area 51. And he sees this moth, a moth, one of the most delicate creatures on Earth, fluttering around inside his cockpit. It had gotten in there before the flight and survived under those conditions, which
Wow.
I got that from one of the test reports. I just found that really striking because here's this poor guy struggling to stay alive and he's in a full pressure suit. And then there's this goofy little moth fluttering around.
That's amazing. Well, apparently those little critters are pretty resilient then. Okay, before we go to the next question, thanks for Cursive J and Aircraft Expeditions for your donations. Much appreciated. Aircraft Expeditions says, awesome live streams. We love all of you. Well, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Next question from Matt Hutz. Peter, weren't the GPUs powered by GM-V8s?
Yes, the ground power units to get the engine started had dual V8 engines in there that were just very powerful. They're very loud too. I can testify to that because I got to stand next to an SR-71 at Edwards when it was starting up, and boy, those things were loud. They needed to get the engine turbine spinning, and then the pilot would hit a button to inject triethylborane chemical to get the fuel to ignite because it was super high flash point fuel called JP7. And so he'd inject the TEB into it, and there'd be this bright green flash out the back of the engine, which I got to see pretty close up.
Wow.
I remember reading about this when I was a kid, and I always heard these stories that the fuel was such a high flash point that if you threw a lit match into a pan of it, the match would go out. And, I've worked around aircraft most of my life, and whenever you have fuel dripping out of a plane, that's usually cause for concern. But these aircraft were designed in such a way that the dripping fuel was expected, and they just had pans and buckets underneath the aircraft in the hangar to catch this fuel. And because of the high flash point, they knew it wasn't going to be a problem. I took advantage of that one time to get a small sample of JP7 and took it out to the desert, put it in a pan, threw a lit match in it, and the match went out. So the stories were true. Got to test that.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. Just see from Cursive J. Jörg, thank you so much for this incredible access to a qualified historian about esoteric topics that can be hard to research on your own. This is amazing, and you are a legend for this. I can only pass that on to Peter. I really appreciate Peter dedicating his time to educating everyone here. And thank you for saying that, Cursive J.
I'm glad that we can have these programs and that there are people interested in the real stories, which I think are so much more fascinating than many of the myths and legends.
I agree, and that's what I'm always trying to tell people. Hey, you don't need UFOs. I mean, this is so much more fascinating. Skywatcher asks, how many missions did the A-12 do for the CIA? Need to refresh my memory. Oh boy, do you have that number in your head?
I don't. I'd have to look it up. In fact, I probably have that in my book. The deployments of operational missions were part of Black Shield. They did a number of flights, 1967, 68, flying over Southeast Asia and even North Korea. And it was a very, very successful program, got a lot of important intelligence data back, a lot of good high-quality photographs. And there are reports on these missions that have been declassified, and they're available on the CIA website.
And I think, yes, that's. I think it's also a lot of that is on the Roadrunners website.
Yes,
A lot of these, and I want to dive into that maybe next time a little more into the deployment to Kadena. Uh, that is a whole fascinating story all in itself. Triple Z 89. I drove a Chevy Colorado pickup for work. I would leave my egg and sausage sandwich in aluminum foil on my dashboard in the sun and full heat, and the in full heat and the windows. The sandwich kept me alive. Okay, well, very good. You got to do what you got to do. And I just see quit 7-6 member for 3 months. Thank you so much for your support. One of my first members here in the stream. And he said, worth it. Also got Peter's book from these streams. Awesome. Awesome. Let's see what we got here. What a privilege. As a kid in the Bob says, as a kid in the mid 60s, a YF-12 was doing an event flyby in Seattle, and my dad and I were outside watching for it. My dad spotted it, but I never saw it. Were flybys like this common back then?
Oh, yeah. The YF-12s, the original test program was at Area 51, starting in 1963. But in 1964, when the president announced its existence, then he moved the flight test operation of the YF-12As to Edwards. And so they started showing up at air shows and doing flybys and things like that. And when the SR-71 came out, I know that one was doing a lot of air shows as well. I got to see the YF-12A that NASA was using. I didn't get to see it fly, but I did get to see it at Edwards. And I got to see the SR-71 fly many times, which was a great privilege. Very exciting to see that.
Absolutely. I unfortunately I never did. I guess I came here too late when I came to the United States from my home, Germany. I think the project had just been wound down. So I wish I would have seen it. I never did. Here's a question from Aircraft Expeditions referring to the skin of the A-12 SR-71. Am I understanding that the fuel sealed after takeoff, was it sealed by pressure or heat?
Actually, what that the integral fuel tanks within the fuselage and wings were sealed with a gray kind of rubbery substance, but it still allowed some leakage, and the panels on the skin, the metal skin of the aircraft, those were a little bit looser than you would typically find on an aircraft because they had tendency to expand due to heating during high-speed flight and tighten up a bit. The way it's described usually is probably not 100% accurate, but the basic thing is that it did sort of seal up by expanding the panels together at their edges somewhat during flight.
So they were basically leaking on the ground, and they couldn't construct it in such a way that it was sealed both in cold and hot conditions.
Yeah, when we had the SR-71s at NASA, I'd go in the hangar, and like I said, there were drip pans and buckets, and you could literally watch and hear the fuel dripping out of it. So,
Wow.
yeah, it could be a little exciting. And in fact, there was a time, I think one of the flights we did, if I remember right, this was for an air show. And on the way back, the Blackbird was refueling, and I think the boom operator said, "Hey, you've got a really bad fuel leak." And the pilot said, "Well, we always leak fuel. See, it's pretty normal." And he said, "No, you don't understand. It's really coming out of there." And they had to make an emergency landing and fix the problem before they continued on. So, yeah, it was a bit tricky.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, the next question, it's maybe I can answer that. Steve Jufy, if I'm reading that correctly, I'm sorry if I butcher your name. What's going on in Mercury now that nuclear testing is over? It's largely the nuclear test site, the Nevada test site, has basically been renamed in Nevada National Security Site, and there's a lot of national security stuff going on there. Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's fair to say that although they're not doing full-scale nuclear testing at the moment, there are still subcritical tests of components to maintain the stockpile of weapons and upgrade weapons that are being produced now. And also, because it is the national security site, they have lots of other projects going on, projects involving cleaning up toxic spills and developing ways to do that, testing robotics for security and other applications, testing unmanned aerial vehicles. There's a lot of different things they do. And probably in the ensuing years, we'll see that the test site is going to be used for other things as well. Some we will hear about, and some that undoubtedly we will not hear about, probably for very good reasons.
Exactly. And that's where they have the room and the space to do these kind of things. And the facilities are already there to some degree. I think the DAF was renovated and repurposed for a different purpose now. The device assembly facility that was
Right.
originally a purpose to assemble nuclear devices, and I
Sure.
think it is. I don't know the full story, and it probably is for the better that we don't. But I think there's something else hush hush going on there now. So, okay, here's another question. Tom Wilson, Peter, do you know the location in the desert where they buried the shipping containers full of SR-71 asbestos-related parts? Supposedly 20 containers were buried around 2007. Do you know
Okay.
anything about that?
I don't know where that ended up. I got to tour some giant warehouses at Barstow, California, at the Marine base there, where NASA was storing lots and lots. And when I say tons, I mean literally tons, as in many thousands of pounds of material for the Blackbird. Everything from raw materials to fully complete spare parts. There were a lot of crates full of those V8 Buick engines, which were in pristine condition. And it will be painful for you to hear that most of the material was in those warehouses, and it did remind me of the Indiana Jones warehouse. Most of that material was run through industrial shredders, and you can see video of that online, I think. I was heartbroken about that, certainly, and a lot of other people were. Many of the things that were in there were offered to museums, but how often does a museum have the available funding to actually transport those kinds of artifacts from the location? So it was just easier to throw it all in the shredder. It was a huge problem, and because there was all that asbestos too, that was another issue. So the Air Force and NASA argued amongst one another, saying, I think it's your responsibility. No, it's your responsibility. And the lawyers sorted it out, and eventually it was disposed of. Now, I don't know where that went to, where it got buried. I know that there have been some landfills that are certificated for the handling of hazardous materials. There was one at Copperopolis, California. It's closed down now, and I'm sure there are others. I know that the debris from the X-31 experimental plane was buried at Copperopolis after that crashed. But other things like the F-22 that crashed near Harper Lake, California, that got buried at Edwards. And I don't know how much other stuff might have been buried at Edwards. So who knows?
Well, it's a shame that all these parts got literally shredded. That's an absolute shame.
It is painful, yes.
Triple Z 89 says, I absolutely love you guys. And he means you, Peter. And I just see Cursive J, thank you for your donation. He asked, what sort of sensor payload would the SR-71 have carried besides cameras in the early operational years, if known?
There were all kinds of different sensors for capturing electronic signals to intercept threat radars, for instance. There were different kinds of cameras that were used, some to get very close-in detailed pictures. Some were designed to cover a wider span over a longer strip. There were synthetic aperture radars that could be used to get images through clouds if you were flying over an area that was covered in clouds and so on and so forth. Just lots and lots of different things. I think most of these have been declassified now, and they're probably described well in some of the books, like Paul Crickmore's wonderful book about the Blackbird Beyond the Secret Missions.
Okay. Uh, yeah, we probably a lot of that stuff is not even fully known and fully documented or declassified. Uh, I'm looking at here's a slightly I'm sort of debating whether I should read the question. I'm just going to go with it. It's kind of a little different type of question from Jeff York. And Jeff, please don't get that wrong. But he asks, here's the question: if you found yourself be diagnosed with a terminal illness and were in your final days allowed to tour Area 51, but the only catch is you have to live out your day there. And I guess his question is, would you?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I spent enough time living and working on an Air Force base, so that they have neat stuff that goes on there, but I don't know that it's sufficiently neat or enough of it to make me want to live there permanently.
Maybe we can rephrase the question slightly. If you were to be given access to Area 51, but you could never talk about it, would you still want to go there? That's my question to you.
Sure, and that is certainly something I once thought of years ago, and I thought, well, yeah, that would have prevented me from writing my book if I'd done it back, way back
Correct.
when. I could do it now because I've already written my book, so it would
Right.
just mean I couldn't write a volume two.
Nice. Good answer. Let's see what we have here. Tom Wilson, there's a good video of the March Air Museum about the 600 million in SR-71 spare parts that were destroyed, disposed of during 2007. Two warehouses full at
That's the
USMC Barstow.
that's the one. Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah, that's a shame. Matt HUDs, are the missions declassified as to what type of missiles the SR-71 outran? Thank you for all your expertise.
Yeah, I think primarily the missiles that were fired at these aircraft were mostly SA-2 surface-to-air missiles. Russians called it Divina, I believe. Trying to remember the Russian designation for that. It might be S-75. And for the most part, all of the Blackbirds were equipped with avionics, defensive avionics, to jam the missiles or cause them to go off in a different direction or things like that, which helped as well as the speed and altitude of the aircraft. And the only Blackbird that ever got hit by any part of that was one of the A-12s. Took a few little bits of shrapnel from one of the missiles that exploded nearby, and the shrapnel got stuck in the wing of the aircraft. And after the plane was recovered, the little bits of shrapnel were taken out and examined and identified, and then finally put in a lucite block, which is now in the CIA museum. They've got the piece of shrapnel next to the piece of titanium with the hole in it. So kind of
Nice.
cool. There's a picture of that in my book, actually.
Very nice. Aircraft Expeditions asks, Peter, come on now. We know you have parts of the black IRD. What is IRD? LOL. I'm not sure what the
You mean
IRD
Blackbird?
stands for.
You mean Blackbird?
Blackbird. Okay, Blackbird. Obviously, that's what he's asking. Yes. There we go. There we go. Nice. Awesome.
Right.
Wow. Is there even a
So yeah,
stamp on the inside?
I just put a label in there, but
Okay.
this is
Wow.
a nice example of the titanium skin assembly from the edge of one of the panels on the Blackbird. It's from the number 5 A-12, the one that Walt Ray was flying, and we will probably talk more about that in a future future live stream talking about that particular mishap. Yeah, it's amazing that Lockheed was able to develop all new tooling and assembly processes to build these aircraft from titanium in ways that no aircraft had ever been built before. Kelly Johnson was originally considering using stainless steel with like a stainless steel honeycomb construction like the North American XB-70, but he realized that it was very, very difficult to work with. And in fact, if you look at the XB-70, that was a flexible airframe too, like the A-12. And that honeycomb sandwich could easily, fatigue due to mechanical flexing. So Kelly Johnson was smart to go with much simpler construction and fewer parts made of titanium.
Which I think somebody mentioned was very hard to tool and to manipulate and to cut and whatnot. And I think that is a whole nother story. And so maybe we can get into that a little more in the next stream.
Sure.
That they went through great lengths to even come up with tools, and I guess they had to throw away the tools after so many cuts and all that good stuff. I'm sure you know all about that.
I wrote a book. I wrote a book called "From Archangel to Senior Crown: Design and Development of the Blackbird," in which I go into that whole process in excruciating detail.
Perfect. We'll keep that for the next live stream. And Tom Wilson said, I think this is referring to you being able to go in there. They would probably hide all the good stuff during that tour. They probably would. Let's see. I would say my goodbyes to my family, and then I'd say I have to go scratch the itch. Okay. Joshua Nyhus, that's a name that I remember from long, long ago with Dreamland
Oh
Resort.
yeah.
Pete or Jörg, have either of you received a patch and or a coin or something that you felt uncomfortable sharing? I have not. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of coins and patches that are interesting, and some of them I've not shared particularly, just because it seemed like I got them from people who would rather not have me share that sort of thing. There are other emblems that I don't mind showing as much. This is
Nice.
a very good one, a very interesting, unique demonstrator for sixth generation fighter technologies that first flew in 2014 and has been used to inform many of the projects that are underway right now as far as developing our future fighter technology. And apparently, it was intended to be a very short project to collect some very specific data points. And once that was done, that would be the end of that program. But one of the people involved, the commander of the test squadron, said, this is just too important. Yeah, we need to continue this program. And the commander out there at Groom said, well, I'm sorry. There's no contracting mechanism that allows us to continue the program. And he said, we have to. It's just too important. And the commanders finally said, look, if you can find a way to do it, I'll give you all the support and manpower you need, thinking he'd promised absolutely nothing. But the guy went out and by God found a way to extend that program. And so it went on for at least another couple of years. I know it was still flying in the fall of 2016. I don't know how long it went beyond that, but sounds like it must have been something really impressive. And hopefully our future things like the NGAD will reflect these new outstanding capabilities.
And this was something flying out of here, out of Groom?
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. And we didn't know a thing about it.
I know the pilot who made the first flights. I know the particular commander who ended up giving his support. I have not met the other guy who was the CTF commander, but yeah, very interesting program.
And what's also interesting is that we didn't know any. I mean, with all the people running around here with scanners and with binoculars and this and that, climbing Tikaboo, we didn't know anything about the project when it was going on. At least
Oh
I
yeah,
didn't.
yeah, right.
So
Nor did I. I didn't hear
uh,
about that till much later.
they have it down very well with the security. Forward Omni, have you ever done any radiological testing on these fragments?
I, I, some years ago, I got myself a very good quality uh, rate meter, what you'd call a Geiger counter for examining stuff, because a lot of aircraft parts over the years have been made with radioactive materials. Sometimes it's alloys that include thorium, so those are inherently radioactive. And of course, many of the early aircraft instruments had radium, and there were radium in the switches to make them visible in the dark. So it seemed like a good idea to have a handy rate meter that could measure not just the big.
Oh no, did we drop out again? Okay.
Oh,
It's
sorry,
coming.
did you lose me?
Yeah, you're
Did you lose
back.
me?
You're back. You're
Okay.
back.
But yes, I have a good Geiger counter. I've used it a number of times at aircraft crash sites and nuclear weapon accident sites and things like that. So it's handy to have that.
Good idea. Tom Wilson says pilot Maury Rosenberg was the guy that had his SR-71 shot at Sam at by North Korea. So, Maury Rosenberg, I'm not familiar with the name. Does it sound? Tom, I take your word for it.
Does not ring a bell. I'd have to look it up. There have certainly been a number of crews who have faced that and got to fly away laughing at their enemy because they were just
Yeah.
not anywhere close.
And Quid76 mentioned something that I've always thought was very ironic. The titanium was bought, some of the titanium for the SR-71 and the A-12 was bought from Russia.
Right, that's true, because a lot of that titanium ore was available over there, and so we imported it and turned it into something that we used to then spy on them.
Well, so we flew it right back over them. Efficient RVer says Tom Mahout once was asked how much titanium he has from that one. He implied about 15 pounds. Wow, that's a lot of titanium.
No, that's not a lot of titanium. I'll tell you a different story. There was an SR-71 that crashed near Lovelock, Nevada, in the Trinity Mountains, and I looked at the accident report for that, and it showed the impact crater was this huge crater. It looked like something on the moon, And so I went out to the site, and the crater was gone, of course, because they'd been there and cleaned up the thing. But there were still lots and lots and lots of pieces of titanium all over the ground. And I thought, wow, this is a lot of titanium. I mean, some of the pieces were pretty good size. But then this guy from the Reno area went up there with some heavy equipment and dug it up. And he brought back, he said he brought back something like 3,000 pounds of titanium, including both canopies, each one weighing 400 pounds.
Oh my God. Wow.
I remember he was trying to sell those on eBay, but I don't know if anybody ever bought it.
Might be an issue with shipping, maybe.
Maybe a bit, yeah.
Aircraft Expedition has a comment for Peter and Jörg. The tooling for the B2 is here in Arizona. I have seen it, he says.
Okay.
Okay, I didn't know that for the B2.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I know with the SR-71, the tooling for that got scrapped well before the end of the program, just because there were people within government who didn't want the assembly line to ever reopen. They didn't want to be able to build more of them. So the tooling got scrapped for that. And I don't know about whether the B-2 tooling was sold as scrap or not. It could have been.
Yeah. Well, probably uh, would make sense. What else are you going to do with it?
Sure,
Uh,
right. Because
we want to. I'm sorry.
they're not planning to build any more of those. And
Right.
presumably they have enough spare parts.
Well, they better got them stashed away somewhere. We're going to probably wind it down here in a little bit. There's a few questions, and I think then we're going to wind it down.
Okay.
Steve Jufy, it seems the fifth generation Lockheed airplanes like F-22 and F-35 were not developed at NTTR. Is that correct?
Those were not black programs, so they were developed basically out in the open, and there wasn't any need to have a remote test site. And to the extent of the black project testing for F-22 and F-35 would have been flying it over the radar ranges out of Nevada to verify the radar cross section.
Yeah. Now here's a question, and if you want to pass on it, just say pass. Question for Peter: have you ever met the commander of Area 51?
I've met quite a few commanders of Area 51, and some of them have been quite friendly, and I've met a few that were less friendly, but yeah.
Oh, look
In
at
fact,
that. We got some company there.
One of them, one of the former commanders, really, well, several of former commanders had said they really liked my book. They appreciated how accurate it was and how detailed. So that
Nice.
was the best review I could possibly have.
Absolutely. I mean, that's right from someone who really knows what they're talking about. Okay, there's still questions coming in. We'll try to find an end here. There's several videos of pilot Maury Rosenberg on YouTube discussing the incident when North Korea shot at him. He actually saw the missile come up and go higher than the aircraft, was around 80 to 82. I remember reading that or seeing it in a video. Yes, that's correct, Tom. Yes, I do remember that. Imagine going to the metal scrapyard with those parts. Where did this come from? Quit 76. Imagine going to the metal scrapyard with those parts. Where did this come from? Question mark. So yeah, I guess you don't want to ask too many questions when you have these tooling scraps.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at what ends up in the scrap yards, because every fleet of aircraft has to go through routine maintenance or modification, and sometimes planes crash, and all of this stuff ends up in a scrap heap, and the Air Force sells it as, auctions it off. I have seen dumpsters full of U-2 parts and Blackbird parts and F-117 parts and B-2 parts and other things. You wouldn't even believe it. I knew a guy who purchased the entire B-2 ejection seat sled test model that was used to test the seats, and eventually he ended up trading that back to the Air Force in exchange for, I think, the cockpit of an A-7 or something else. So you just never know.
Yeah. Tom Wilson says there was SR-71 tooling left over in 2007. They tried shredding it and cutting it with a torch, but they were unsuccessful. They sent it to AMARC in Tucson.
AMARC, right? Yep.
AMARC in Tucson, yeah. So I guess it was so good, so well made that they couldn't destroy it. And Joshua Naihu says, I saw Pete talking about how easy it can get to grab project plane metal for Kettich. Key tags.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
See,
for key tags, yeah.
That's if you look online nowadays, there are several different little companies that are making keychain tags that have been cut from various aircraft parts, and I really hate seeing some of these parts get cut up. Like there are some keychain tags that are from the SR-71, and I recognize the material. It's from the tail fin, those giant all moving rudders. And I think they're charging like upwards of $1,000 for one of these keychain tags that is made from a piece of this tail. I remember some years ago when somebody had a bunch of those tails, the whole tails, individual tail fins. I mean, and he was selling them for $500 a piece. Now,
Huh.
I knew a guy who bought one, and he leaned it up against his garage because that's about the only place you can display it. It weighs so much that it would be too awkward and difficult to have as a display item. So, not the sort of thing I would be interested in, but it's still pretty cool.
It is absolutely, it is cool. But the question remains, how do you ship something like that? I mean, you'd have to hire a
Right.
freight
Well,
company
and
to.
and that's why these companies cut things up into little bitty pieces and sell them as keychain tags. And I guess that does give a wider audience of enthusiasts an opportunity to own a piece of their favorite aircraft. But it's still heartbreaking to see some of the pieces that get chopped up to do that.
Yeah. Okay, this is the last question. I think after that, we're winding things
Okay.
down. And folks, if we don't get, there's a few questions left here. I think if we didn't get to you, we'll address it next time. I'm going to make notes of it and we will answer the questions next time, whatever is left over. Last question here from Triple Z89. Are either of you guys into cars? If so, do you guys drive anything cool or nah? I must know. After
Well,
you.
all right. I tell you, the coolest car I ever owned was a 1977 Camaro, and I often do miss that car quite a bit. Um, I liked it a lot, but then I found myself exploring the desert a lot and driving that Camaro to places like Chloride City, a ghost town in Death Valley, which I've since driven in a Jeep and said, how on earth did I ever get a Camaro up here? It turns out what I really needed was a four-wheel drive vehicle, so I ended up trading that in for something more practical.
And I remember we drove up to that Chloride City spot together, and I remember you telling me that story while we were driving on this really
Right.
bumpy, bouncy dirt road, and I just can't possibly imagine how you got that vehicle up there. Uh, oh, I think you're frozen again. Okay, there you
Oh,
are. You're back. It's all good.
yeah.
So yeah, I just couldn't possibly imagine how would you possibly get that thing up here without completely destroying it. But I gotta say no, I don't drive anything cool. I have a 20, how old is it? 28-year-old Chevy Tahoe that still does me very well. It gets me to where I need to go, and I have a pickup truck, Chevy Silverado pickup truck. I do still miss my Beamer that I had back home in Germany, but it just isn't very practical out here. So I guess the next best thing would be a Beamer SUV, maybe one day if I hit the lottery.
The only other cool car that I've ever gotten to drive, my college roommate had I think it was a 1970 Dodge Challenger, bright green, that he let me drive sometimes, and I really did like that one quite a bit.
Awesome, awesome. And Triple Z, I do actually have two motorcycles. I have a 2015 CVO Limited and a 2008 Heritage. Harleys, of course. So maybe that gets me a little bit in the cool corner here. uh, I think we're almost at an hour and a half again. I still see questions coming in. We will address them next time. I think for today we've had enough fun. We've had about all the fun we can handle. And Peter, thank you so much for sharing all this with us, for spending your time on the stream. I think it went great again.
We'll be back again with more stories.
We will do it again, and we'll do the A-12 part 2 next time. Thank you so much, Peter.
Okay.
Okay, and now I pushed the wrong button here. Here we are. Okay, sorry about that, folks. So next Friday, we have the live stream with TD Barnes. Obviously, a guy who has really worked at Area 51, not somebody who has a good story about having worked there and never did. He's full of stories about Area 51. He'll tell you day-to-day life there, and you don't want to miss that next Friday at 6 p.m. on this channel. And then on February 6th, we're planning the next member live stream at 6 p.m. also, where I'm going to share little bits and pieces of behind the scenes stuff, and it's kind of a smaller group. I enjoy that too, and it's great to give a little back to the people that support me and my work. Remember, if you want to become a member for the less than the price of a cup of coffee a month, you get all the inside scoop. And if you want to become a member, here is a link that you can hopefully click on and become a member. All that said, thanks all of you for tuning in, for participating. It was another great live stream. We both really enjoyed it. And I will see you again next week with TD Barnes. Until then, have a great weekend, and please remember to like and subscribe.
Left Germany behind, built a life his way. Rachel, Nevada, dust and light. Jets in the sky, no aliens inside. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will and a heart of gold. Dreamland Resort for 30 years strong. Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts. His legacy. Scanner to his ear, the signals run wild. YouTube in his heart, camera live. The FBI came, but they can't break him down. His fire keeps burning, it won't drown. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will and a heart of gold. Dreamland Resort for 30 years strong. Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts. His legacy. 30 years of desert, 30 years of dust. Eyes on the truth, in truth he trusts. Dreamland Resort for 30 years strong. Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts. His legacy. Dreamland Resort, he still won't bend. The truth in the sky will guide till the end. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts. His legacy. Support the man who brings the truth alive on Dreamland Resort, where freedom survives. Donate for jerk, he'll thank you true. He lives his dream, nothing breaks through.